Okay, one more thing that I want to show you before we move things along. Now, whether you've consciously realized it or not, the order of our child flex items as they appear over inside the browser is the order in which they appear inside the code. One of the big challenges, if you've ever used floats to build your web layouts, is that floats rely on the order that elements appear inside our code. And if we want to change the position of something in a floating layout, then we have to change its order inside the source code. And of course, this can get tricky. However, Flexbox allows us to very easily and quickly change the order of our layout elements by using the order property. And of course, that's what we're going to be taking a look at here. And setting a single value, by the way, for the order property, which is what this is all about here. If we want to change the order of our layout elements inside the browser, inside our layout, we simply have to change a single value, of course, on the order property. The order property is going to be applied directly to our child flex items. So this is going to be now the second property that we've seen applied to flex items, the child flex items. So a little bit of setup here before we really get tearing into this. First of all, back on the parent ID selector here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of his width and height. Okay, I'm going to grab those guys and just delete them like so. Okay, something like this. The other thing I'm going to toast is the align content, which we were using, of course, in the previous exercise. So we'll get rid of that guy as well. Okay. And the other thing I'm going to do is on the child items themselves, what I'll do is I'll stick, once again, a height onto these guys. And I'll stick with my example of 100 pixels that I've been using all the way along here. And if I go and save my code and head back to the browser and refresh, of course, we wind up back here, which is where we've been a number of times already. Now, let's do something simple to get things started here to demonstrate how we can change the order of our child flex items. Of course, you can see the numbered order inside the browser, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. No big deal. What I'm going to do, very simply, is just reverse that order. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to head down to the class rule that's controlling child number 9. This guy here, he's the olive guy way over on the right-hand side, okay? Or really, more accurately, I should say, this is the class rule that's controlling the div element way over on the right-hand side. And all I'm going to do with this guy is I'm going to throw in this order property. Okay, so very simply just order, full colon space, and I mentioned just a second ago that it's just a single value, some kind of a value. So I'll type in 1, like so, followed by a semicolon. Okay? Now, to really show you this here, if you'll bear with me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this code here and copy it. And what I'll do is I'll go and paste this into all of my other child class rules, if we want to call them that. Something like this. Okay, so they all have the same order value, which we'll talk about in just a moment. What happens when we have the same value being used on multiple elements. But for the time being here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a countdown. So 1, 2, and then 7 is going to become 3, like so. 4, 5, and 6. If I can get my fingers happening here. There we go. And then, of course, 7, 8, and all the way down to 9 for the first child element, like so. Okay? Now, when I go and save my code and head back to the browser and refresh, we've reversed the order of all of the child elements. And I really got to stress this, without changing the order of anything inside of our code, inside of our HTML. So as you can see in this very simple introductory demonstration here, we can use the order property to control the order that the elements appear inside of our layout. So think about how you may apply this to your own layouts and your own projects, of course. Now, I want to talk more specifically about the values that we can use. You can use any value essentially from 0 to infinity. I'm keeping it very simple, just using simple values here, but you could use a value like 0 or a value like 100 or 500 or something like this, depending on exactly what it is you're trying to pull off. So, for instance, what I could do is I could take child number 1 here, this guy here, and I'll change his order value from 9 to 0, like so. And then I'll go ahead and save, back to the browser, and refresh. And now he's positioned first because his value is lower than the next value. 1, of course. 0 coming before 1, of course. So he gets positioned first. All right? So you can use 0. You can use larger values, whatever it is that you like. You can even use negative values if you like. Check this out. I'm going to go and find child number 2, this guy here. And right now he's set to 8. I'm going to change that to -5. How's that? I'll go and save my code and then back to the browser and refresh. And now he becomes the very first element, the very first child item here. How come? Because -5 is lower than 0 and 0 is lower than 1. Okay, so that's what's happening there. So negative values appear before positive values. If you're taking notes there, you might want to jot this down. Now, if we set multiple flex items to use the same order value, then what's going to happen in that situation is the source order, in other words, the order in which they appear inside the code, is going to be used to determine which element comes first, which element comes second. Let me show you what I mean here. I'm going to go back to my code here. And we have, of course, child 2 set to -5. I'm going to take child 1 and set him also to -5. Okay, so we have 2 child elements that are using the same order value. I'm going to save my code and refresh. And now 1 comes before 2. How come? Because inside my code, the child item 1 appears before child item 2. Okay? So, again, to repeat one more time, whenever we have the same order value being used, what happens is the order in which they appear inside the code is going to be used to determine the order in which they appear inside the browser, inside of our layout. Okay? All right. Now, what if a child flex item doesn't have an order specified at all? Well, what'll happen in that situation is it'll appear before any child flex items that do have an order value. Does that make sense? So let me show you this here. I'm going to go and find, let's see here. This is what I'll do. I'm going to grab child number 1 here, child class 1 there. And what I'll do is I'll toast his order value. Okay, I'm going to get rid of it. As a matter of fact, what I'll do is I will repeat that all the way through, all the way down to child number 6. Okay, so just bear with me for a second here. I promise the wait will be worth it. There we go, something like this. So I've removed the order value from the first 6 child items. Okay, so just to remind you, child 9, 8, and 7 are set to 1, 2, and 3. Okay, order values. So I'm going to go and save my code here back to the browser. And any ideas of what's going to happen here? I'm going to refresh. Now we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because there's no order value on those guys. Okay, so they appear before the child flex items that do have order values. Okay, so they appear in the layout, in the order in which they appear inside the code. Then the order value kicks in with 9, and he's appearing before 8 and 7 because he has the lower order value. That's what happens in this scenario where we have child flex items that don't have an order value set to them. Okay, so I hope this all makes sense. And setting the order value of child elements seems pretty straightforward at first, and it is, really. There's not a whole lot to it. You just have to remember that child items that don't have an order appear before child items that do have an order value. You also have to remember that child items with lower order values appear before child items with higher order values. Pretty straightforward. And child items with negative order values appear before child items with positive values. That's kind of it. That's really not, rocket science or anything like that, which is great. And that's how things work unless we start monkeying around with the FlexFlow property on the parent container. This is something I'm going to add into this lesson here because this order value, while it may seem straightforward at first, and again, it really is, it can get confusing if you have a FlexFlow property applied to the parent and that FlexFlow property changes. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. I'm going to go to my parent ID selector, okay? And right now, his FlexFlow property is set to row, and I still have the wrap on there from the previous exercise. But it's really the flow direction that I'm referring to, if I can get it selected here, the row, okay? What if we wind up with something like this? What if we wind up using row, remember this, reverse, something like this? if I go and save my code and head back to the browser, any guesses what might happen? We know something's going to happen. We're just not really sure what. Go ahead and refresh. This is what I wind up getting. And you might be going, what just happened? Well, what happened is everything is now reversed, but the order values are still being respected. They're just mirrored or reversed. So way over on the right-hand side, I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the next child item that has order value 1, which is 9, then 2, which is 8, and then 3, which is 7. So everything's completely mirrored and reversed. So the only reason why I'm showing you this is because it can get confusing if you're using this row reverse. You may get unintentional results, and you may sort of sit here and scratch your head trying to figure out exactly what just happened. It's all about the order value, okay? So I hope that makes sense. Hopefully no problems here. What I'm going to do inside my code here anyway is I'm going to go and reset everything here. I want to set us up for the next exercise. So I'm going to take off that row reverse off of the flex flow property there. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my justify content off of the parent ID selector. And finally, what I'll do, at least for myself anyway, is I'm going to remove my order values from my 3 remaining child elements. And I'm saying here that I'm doing this at least for myself because, again, I'm preparing us for the next exercise. However, as I save my document here, you may, as always, you may want to pause the video and monkey around a little bit with what we've discussed here in this exercise.